"Get that mutt away from here, Alex." The sharp voice of Daniel Rourke, head of the town council, cut through the summer air. His hand gripped his daughter's arm as she paused on the creaky playground swing, staring wide-eyed at the German shepherd that refused to back down. Alex Mendez, the dog's owner, tightened his hold on the leash. "He's not dangerous, Daniel. He's never growled like this before. Something's wrong." His voice carried a quiet edge of alarm, not defensiveness. Children scattered, their laughter cut short by the unsettling sound. The shepherd ranger stood rigid, hackles raised, throat vibrating with a low, guttural growl. His gaze never wavered from the dirt beneath the swing set, as if something unseen pulsed beneath the soil. Parents pulled their kids closer, murmurs rising, judgment falling quickly on Alex as though the fault lay only in his leash hand. But it wasn't just a dog's random fit. Alex knew this animal better than anyone. Ranger had been his companion since the fire that had taken Alex's wife 5 years earlier. That dog had led him out of smoke and ruin when the roof collapsed, dragging him to safety by the sleeve. Ranger did not growl without reason. A girl broke the uneasy silence. It was Mia Rourke, Daniel's daughter, her voice trembling. "Daddy, it's not him. Look, he keeps staring at the ground." She pointed at the soil beneath her swing. Her feet scraped back against the dust as she moved away. Eyes still locked on the spot. The crowd shifted, whispers spreading like brushfire. Someone muttered about gas lines, another about buried wires. But Alex heard something different, the faintest sound. Muffled, rhythmic, like a soft tapping far beneath their feet. He crouched, pressing his hand to the dirt. It was warm, unnaturally so. The shepherd's growl deepened, vibrating in Alex's bones. "There's something here," he said firmly, glancing up at Daniel. "We need to check." Daniel bristled. His position in the community demanded control, not panic. "No, we'll have maintenance come tomorrow. This playground is safe. You're scaring people with your mutt's theatrics." But Ranger lunged forward, yanking the leash with such force that Alex nearly lost his grip. The dog pawed at the dirt, claws tearing grooves into the packed earth. Children gasped, parents held them tighter. Dust rose, catching sunlight in ghostly swirls. Alex swallowed hard. His gut told him to act, though Daniel's glare warned otherwise. Kneeling, he dug his fingers into the soil alongside Ranger. It was looser than he expected, like it had been turned recently, then covered again. His heart picked up pace. "Stop," Daniel barked, stepping forward, but another voice cut through, a quieter, steadier one. "It isn't the dog that's frightening me, Daniel." It was Eleanor Price, the retired librarian who had lived in the neighborhood for 50 years. She leaned on her cane, her sharp, gray eyes fixed on the churned earth. "It's the ground itself. I've seen this before." The hush that followed was palpable. Eleanor's words carried weight. She was the sort who spoke only when silence had sharpened into necessity. Alex froze soil under his fingernails, watching her expression harden into something like dread. "What do you mean?" he asked. Her lips pressed thin, trembling slightly. "Years ago, before this playground was built, there was a sinkhole. They said they filled it in with rubble. But not everything that went into that hole was rubble." Her gaze flicked down at Ranger, still clawing, growling as though trying to unearth something that refused to stay buried. The crowd stirred uneasily. Daniel's authority faltered for the first time, his eyes darting from the dog to Eleanor. Then it came, the sound no one could deny. A hollow crack from beneath the swing, followed by a rush of stale, fetid air that hissed through the broken soil. Ranger barked wildly, pulling Alex back just as the ground sagged inward with a groan. Children screamed, parents dragged them away. Daniel stood pale and rigid, while Eleanor clutched her cane, whispering words no one wanted to hear. Something was left here. Alex's stomach twisted as he stared at the collapsing dirt. For years the playground had been the heart of the neighborhood, a place of safety, laughter, and life. Now the earth itself seemed to breathe secrets back into daylight. Secrets the dog had sensed before any of them dared to see. And as Ranger's growls turned frantic barks, Alex realized they weren't dealing with a broken pipe or loose soil. This was something far darker, something that had been buried for decades, waiting for a restless animal to uncover it. The soil gave way faster than anyone expected, collapsing inward with a muffled roar. Dust rose in choking clouds as the swing tilted and its chains screeched against the frame. Parents clutched their children, pulling them back as the ground yawned open, exposing a jagged pit no one had imagined could exist beneath a playground that had stood for decades. Ranger barked furiously at the edge, his body trembling with the intensity of his instincts, while Alex fought to keep him from lunging straight into the void. Daniel shouted for order, but his voice cracked under the weight of panic. He tried to corral the crowd, insisting it was a sinkhole, nothing more, but the fear in his own eyes betrayed him. His daughter Mia tugged at his sleeve, whispering through tears, "Daddy, there's something down there." Her words were lost in the rising cries of children who clung to their parents' legs, demanding to go home. Alex dropped to his knees and peered into the pit. The dust began to settle, revealing shapes half buried in the dark soil. At first, he thought it was shattered wood or broken concrete remnants of the old sinkhole Eleanor had mentioned. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw the outline of something disturbingly human. Fingers, pale and stiff, jutted from the earth like roots that had been torn from their place. A wave of nausea rolled through him, but Ranger's frantic barks pressed him forward. "There's someone here." Alex's voice broke, raw and disbelieving. He reached down with trembling hands, scraping at the dirt, unearthing more of the form. Gasps rippled through the onlookers as what had once been flesh and bone came into view, weathered by years underground, yet unmistakable. Daniel staggered backward, shaking his head. "No, this isn't possible." This playground was certified safe. Inspected, his words trailed into silence as Eleanor's cane tapped twice against the asphalt. She did not look surprised, only heartbroken. Not everything weighs Daniel. Some things were deliberately forgotten. The revelation struck the crowd like lightning. Parents shielded their children's eyes, dragging them away, while a few remained frozen in place, unable to turn from the horror. Alex kept digging, his chest heaving with every breath, until he uncovered the tattered remains of a child's dress, fabric faded but still clinging stubbornly to the earth. He stopped then, his throat tight, tears blurring his vision. Ranger pressed close, whining now instead of barking, as if mourning alongside him. The air grew heavy, carrying with it an unmistakable stench that rose from the opened ground. It wasn't just one body. The outline of another appeared beside the first, smaller still. Alex recoiled, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He realized with dawning horror that this was no accident of nature. This was intentional. Someone had buried these children beneath a place meant for laughter and innocence. Daniel dropped to his knees, clutching his head. The man who once commanded the respect of every neighbor now seemed hollow, broken by the weight of truth. "My father, he was on that construction team when this park was built," he told me. "The sinkhole was a nuisance, nothing more. I never questioned him. Dear God, what have we been letting our children play over?" His words fell into the silence unanswered. Because there was no comfort to offer. Eleanor closed her eyes, her face pale and drawn. "I tried to tell them something was wrong all those years ago," she whispered. "Strange disappearances. Children who never came home from the next street over. They said it was nonsense, blamed the woods, blamed runaways. No one wanted to believe me. They built over it. They thought silence would bury the truth." The crowd had thinned now, leaving only a handful of witnesses too shaken to move. Alex remained at the edge of the pit, staring at the fragile bones of lives cut short, his heart pounding with grief and fury. He thought of the nights he had walked his own daughter through this park years ago, her small hand in his, never knowing the ground beneath them carried such darkness. Ranger whimpered, pressing his head against Alex's shoulder. The dog's unease had led them here, but the discovery was more than Alex could bear. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. Who could do this? Who would bury children here? The question hung in the air like smoke, and no one dared answer. But deep inside, Alex sensed this was only the beginning. What they had uncovered was not just a tragedy, it was a secret the town had lived on top of for decades, a rot beneath, the foundation of trust, now clawing its way back into the light. Daniel rose unsteadily, eyes darting between Alex and Eleanor. "This stays quiet. Do you understand me? If this gets out, the town will be ruined." His tone was desperate, almost pleading, but Alex's jaw tightened with resolve. The days of silence had ended. Ranger had unearthed the truth, and Alex knew it would not go back into the ground so easily. The playground, once filled with laughter, now stood abandoned in eerie silence. The swing swayed gently, creaking in the breeze, as if echoing the lives it had unknowingly dangled above for the first time since the collapse. Alex felt the weight of every watching eye, the crowd waiting for someone to speak, someone to choose between silence and justice. He looked down at Ranger, whose gaze was fixed unwaveringly on the pit. The dog's growl had become a low whimper, but his body remained rigid, as if he understood the gravity of what they had uncovered. Alex's voice rose, steady despite the tears streaking his face. "We can't bury this again. Not ever." The words fell heavy, carrying a promise that whatever lay beneath the playground would finally be brought into the light. The playground was no longer a place of laughter. It had transformed into a trembling circle of fear, ringed by parents clutching their children and neighbors whispering nervously. The swing creaked in the warm breeze, its chains rattling against the frame like a warning bell. Ranger's body remained taut, nose pressed low to the dirt, barking with a desperation that made the skin prickle at the back of Alex's neck. Something beneath him wanted to be noticed. Eleanor Price stood close to the disturbed soil, her cane planted firmly, her face ashen yet resolute. "This isn't the first time," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "When they built this playground, I asked questions no one wanted to answer." Her voice, heavy with years of memory, sliced through the chaos. Daniel roared, still clinging to his fragile sense of authority, raised a hand for silence. "Enough of this. We're not digging up the park because of an old woman's tales and a dog's tantrum." His words lacked conviction, though his tone tried to carry power. Yet even as he spoke, the ground gave another sickening groan, a subtle collapse, releasing another gust of stale air that smelled of iron and decay. Children buried their faces in their mothers' coats, and several adults stumbled back, muttering prayers. Alex couldn't tear his eyes from Ranger. The dog's instincts had saved him once before, and the memory of that fire still haunted him, the way flames had closed around him until Ranger had dragged him into oxygen, refusing to let go. The shepherd wasn't wrong now. Something was hidden here, something the earth itself seemed to resist keeping covered. He dropped to his knees again, clawing through the dirt with both hands despite the gasps and Daniel's furious protests. The soil was looser now, easier to break apart, as though years of pressure had finally reached a breaking point. "Alex, stop!" Daniel barked, but his voice cracked. It was Eleanor's sudden cry that froze him in place. "Look," she shouted, pointing with her trembling cane. There, half buried in the churned soil, was something pale, something that caught the light with a sickly gleam. At first it looked like stone, smooth and irregular, but as Alex brushed more dirt away, shape emerged. A curved surface, hollow sockets. His breath caught in his throat. A skull. The crowd erupted in screams and gasps, the sound splitting the air as though the earth itself had cried out with them. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. Some fathers pulled their families toward the street, while others stood frozen in disbelief. Daniel staggered back, his face drained of color. The man who had barked orders only minutes earlier now looked small, powerless, stripped of certainty. Alex's hands trembled as he backed away, soil still clinging to his fingers. He locked eyes with Ranger, who had ceased barking and now stood, silent, ears back, chest heaving. The dog's silence was worse than the growl. It was as if he knew what lay beneath was not just human remains but something layered with stories too painful to stay. Hidden Eleanor's cane shook as she leaned heavily upon it, her eyes fixed on the exposed skull. "I warned them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "When the sinkhole opened years ago, they filled it too quickly. They never asked why it opened or what it swallowed." Tears brimmed in her eyes, her voice catching. "I remember the day a boy went missing. They said he'd run away. But his mother, she never believed it. She died with that ache in her heart." The crowd fell into a stunned silence, the weight of Eleanor's words pressing on them like a storm cloud. Daniel finally found his voice, but it cracked, laced with desperation. We don't know. This is connected. It could be anything. An old burial ground, an accident from long ago. This doesn't mean." His words faltered as the skull rolled slightly in the loose soil, revealing a second fragment nearby, a smaller bone, fragile and unmistakably human. Mia, Daniel's daughter, clung to her father's leg, her voice thin with fear. "Daddy, the ground sounds like it's breathing." Her words were childish, yet chillingly true. With each collapse, a hollow exhale seemed to escape, as though the soil itself carried echoes of the dead. Alex stood, chest heaving, dirt streaking his arms. His mind whirled with questions, with the weight of what they had stumbled upon. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the horror of what lay in front of him left him raw and silent. Then Ranger barked again, sharp and insistent, but not at the skull. His body angled toward a spot just beside the bones, pawing furiously. Alex hesitated only a moment before kneeling again. With trembling hands, he helped uncover the soil. What emerged was not another bone but something wrapped, brittle and dark with age, cloth disintegrating at the edges, tied around a small tin box. Gasps rose once more as Alex carefully pulled it free. The box was rusted, edges jagged, yet intact. He held it up, and for a long moment, the entire playground seemed to hold its breath. Daniel whispered hoarsely, "What have you done, Alex?" But his question was less accusation and more fear, a trembling recognition that the box might hold truths no one wanted to face. Alex stared at it, the weight heavy in his hands, the soil still clinging to its surface. Ranger whined softly, pressing against his leg, urging him forward. Around him, neighbors leaned closer despite themselves. Drawn by the lure of secrets buried too long, the air felt thick, the sunlight strangely muted as though the day itself recoiled from the revelation. Alex swallowed hard, sensing that whatever rested inside that box would not just explain the bones but tear apart the stories. This town had told itself for generations. The growl that had begun with a dog had now unearthed more than a skull. It had cracked open a truth the earth had tried to swallow, a truth waiting for this exact moment to be seen. And as Alex stood with the box in his hands, he realized the twist was not only what lay below the swing, it was what the living would now be forced to remember. The evening settled heavy over the playground, yet the tension that gripped the crowd refused to loosen. Ranger had not stopped pacing, his body coiled tight as if every muscle anticipated a fight. Alex's arms ached from keeping the leash taut, but the thought of letting go felt reckless, almost dangerous. Daniel's voice carried sharp frustration, but beneath it trembled something unspoken fear. Parents clustered together, their children pressed close, eyes darting toward the swing set where the ground had already caved into a shallow hollow. The smell that drifted from it was unmistakable now, the sour bite of rot clinging to the air. Eleanor stepped closer, her cane sinking slightly into the soft dirt. "This isn't just a sinkhole," she said quietly, more to herself than the others. There's something buried here that was never meant to see daylight. Her words, though calm, cracked the air like thunder. Alex felt his stomach lurch at the gravity of it. Ranger's growls deepened, his nails raking the dirt with renewed desperation, as if the truth was his burden to reveal. Mia clung to her father's sleeve, her voice small. "Daddy, I don't like this. Please, can we leave?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He was a man who prided himself on order, yet the scene was unraveling beyond his control. "We'll leave when I say it's safe," he replied, though his tone wavered. Then it happened. The soil beneath the swing shifted violently, a sudden collapse, sending a tremor through the ground. Dust and pebbles tumbled into the widening, a hole, and for an instant silence reigned, broken only by Ranger's frantic barking. Alex, heart pounding, crouched low and peered into the dark hollow. What he saw froze him in place. Not just rocks or rubble, something pale jutted out from the packed earth, curved and unmistakable. A bone gasps erupted. Someone screamed, sharp and piercing, before being muffled by a parent's hand. Eleanor shut her eyes, the weight of confirmation bending her frame. Daniel staggered back, his face drained of color, his authority unraveling thread by thread. "No, this can't be," he whispered, but the evidence lay half exposed at his feet, and denial was no longer an option. Alex's throat tightened. Memories of his wife's death flickered on bidden flames, smoke, the desperate helplessness of not being able to save her. That same hollow helplessness pressed against him now. But he couldn't look away. This was no accident of time or nature. Whatever had been hidden here carried intention, and Ranger had dragged it into the open. The smell grew stronger as the dirt continued to crumble, exposing more shapes beneath the surface. The crowd recoiled, hands pressed to mouths, while some clutched their children as though shielding them from a truth too raw to witness. Mia's sobs cut through the murmurs, and Daniel finally scooped her into his arms. His earlier bravado stripped away, Alex rose slowly, his chest tight, his hand trembling on Ranger's collar. The shepherd pressed against him, eyes fierce, tail stiff. The dog had led them here for a reason, to this very moment where silence and secrets could no longer remain buried. Eleanor's voice, though weak, carried the weight of finality. "I told them years ago," she said, tears wetting her lashes. "I told them not everything went into rubble. They wouldn't listen." Her confession hung in the dusk like a verdict. The crowd murmured louder, fear twisting into suspicion, suspicion sharpening into accusation. Alex looked from the hole to the faces around him and realized the playground would never again be what it was. Something had been unearthed, not just in the soil but in the hearts of everyone present. And as Ranger leaned forward with another, guttural growl, Alex understood with chilling clarity this was only the beginning. The hollow widened as the last of the soil slid away, revealing the outline of a wooden box fractured by time and pressure. Its splintered boards clung weakly together, yet the shape was unmistakable, a child-sized coffin. The crowd fell into stunned silence, the weight of discovery pressing down harder than the humid night air. Ranger stood rigid beside Alex, no longer growling, only watching with a stillness that carried more gravity than noise. Daniel's grip on his daughter tightened, his face etched with horror. For once he had no command, no assurance to offer. Eleanor's trembling hand brushed against her cane as tears carved lines into her weathered face. "I begged them not to bury it here," she whispered, the words breaking under years of silence. "But they chose convenience over conscience." Her confession tore through the crowd, unraveling the myth of safety that had long cloaked the playground. Alex's chest constricted as he stared into the pit, every memory of loss flooding back. He thought of his wife, of the fire, of how grief had taught him the fragility of trust. And now he stood before a truth that showed the same lesson in soil and wood. This ground, once alive with children's laughter, carried the memory of something abandoned, hidden, and forgotten. The betrayal was not just in the box, it was in the silence that had allowed it to rest there for decades. Ranger pressed closer, his warm flank grounding Alex in the moment. The dog had been the first to sense what others chose to ignore, the guardian who demanded they confront what lay beneath. Alex's hand found a shepherd's head, fingers curling into fur. The bond between them a quiet reminder of loyalty when human choices faltered. As the last rays of sunlight faded, and the first streetlights flickered on, the crowd dispersed, carrying whispers and unease into the night. The playground stood hollow, stripped of innocence. Alex remained a moment longer, staring at the box, his voice quiet but firm. "The ground remembers what we try to forget." The words hung in the cooling air, a truth carved deeper than the roots beneath their feet. And as Ranger finally lay down at his side, the earth seemed to settle, its secret uncovered, its silence finally broken.